Now we're going to move to the United States. We talked about women from the colonial period and the early part of the 19th century in the United States, in America earlier. And now we're going to talk, I guess I should say, about mid and later 19th century. One of the interesting things is that there were a number of American women sculptors. We haven't seen a lot of sculpture. Properzia di Rozzi, of which very little survives, and they talk about her carving on peach pits or fruit pits. And of course, Louisa Roldan, a wonderful sculptor there. So, you know, sculpture, which is sort of a heavy physical activity, doesn't seem something that, you know, you would think of a dainty little woman doing, perhaps. Well, the truth was that there were quite a few women artists who were sculptors and who had a reputation. And so now we're going to talk about them. Had a reputation for being good sculptors. Okay. The first one we're going to talk about is Harriet Hosmer. And Harriet Hosmer was born in Watertown, Massachusetts. Her mother had died, and she was raised by her father, who was a physician. And he had certain ideas about how you should raise the young lady, and they weren't the conventional ones. For one thing, he, as a physician, felt that corsets were very detrimental to women, and they shouldn't wear them. So she didn't have to wear a corset, and she didn't wear a corset when she was older, too. And the other thing was he believed that women should get exercise, which was something that, you know, no, women should not do. Even when I was growing up, I thought women shouldn't do that. You know, that's not feminine. You know. The idea of, you know, women engaging in sporting activities. Well, she got exercise. In fact, maybe she went a little further than her dad had thought. She was a tomboy. She was well known around her town for playing all sorts of pranks. Was she a borderline juvenile delinquent? Well, they considered them pranks, but some of them were pretty outrageous. And she was an athlete. She climbed a mountain in Missouri, and now it's Mount Hosmer. It's named for her. So she was a rather unusual young lady. They had a lot of problems with her in school. And so finally they shipped her off to a boarding school, which turned out to be a very excellent school to ship her to. This was Elizabeth sorry, I'm going to pronounce it in German. Sedgwick. I can't even speak English. Elizabeth Sedgwick's boarding school in Lenox, New York. And it was a school for young ladies that had some really interesting ideas about how to educate young ladies, and it wasn't just decorum and I want to say dainty little finishing school. Women were supposed to learn things like Latin and Greek, as well as French. They learned hygiene, not sure what they learned for that, and literature. And they were also supposed to have discipline, which Hosmer evidently needed, establish great friendships. And one of the most wonderful things about this was they had all of these people who were the intellectuals of the day from New England come and visit and lecture at the school. So she would have seen both men and women of, you know, high intellectual status at her school, and evidently she did quite well there. She decided she was going to be a sculptor, and she needed to learn anatomy. Well, remember, this was always one of the problems for the woman who wanted to portray human figures. They were not allowed to study anatomy throughout the ages. She found a place where she could. The medical school at St. Louis in Missouri did accept a very few women into their program. It was one of the very few places that a woman could study medicine. And so she enrolled in medical school. I don't think she was intending to be a doctor. Her father was a physician. But if so, she learned her anatomy. And we have some drawings from that period. Then in 1852, Harriet, her father, and Charlotte Cushman was in Rome. Cushman, and I found a portrait in the National Portrait Gallery, was a famous actress of the time. She was famous for painting what they called breeches parts, which were when someone like Viola, the woman who is masquerading as a man, and these were the breeches parts, so Viola would have been one of her roles. Viola from As You Like It, Shakespearean play. You see she's got that very strong jaw, and I suppose that probably helped her with the breeches parts, as they say. There was a whole community in Rome of writers, like Hawthorne, actors, actresses, and artists. And Cushman befriended the women sculptors who came and brought them into the group. And so the women sculptors became very, very much part of this intellectual group of Americans in Rome. Now, when she was in Rome, Harriet Hosmer was able to study sculpture with John Gibson, who was an English sculptor, neoclassical sculptor. I bring you in a example of his work. As you can see, calm, cool, collected, beautiful draperies, ideal forms. This is neoclassicism. And so Harriet Hosmer adopts the neoclassical style, as you'll see a number of the women artists do. And I'll show you some of her work. This is from the 1850s, so fairly early work for her, is a bust called Hesper. Some of her busts are named with classical names. Her work looks very calm, cool, collected, ideal, perfect, classical forms. She herself, however, was considered extremely eccentric, and she scandalized the Romans because she was riding a horse, I presume breakneck speeds, through the streets of Rome, unaccompanied by a man, which was just not done. But she did it. I suppose they said, no, those weird foreigners. Something that you may have heard of or seen, even if you didn't know it was by Harriet Hosmer, this is a cast that she took of the hands of Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning, holding their hands in a very famous love story of the two poets, who were friends of hers, as you can see, part of that group. And that's just I think, just a very moving piece. She continued, of course, with her classical subjects. I've never known how you pronounce this name, spell it by pronouncing. One, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. She was the nymph, the young lady who was deserted by Paris when he left to pursue Helen. Paris had been living as a shepherd on Mount Ida, and he was living with supposedly his beloved, and when he got the opportunity to abscond with the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, he deserted his former love. And so it's just this beautiful marble statue. It is serene in the features. It is ideal, it's graceful, and it completely conveys this restrained emotion in the pose of the woman who is bowed down by the faithlessness of her lover. And it's probably something a lot of women, could understand. And intellectually, of course, anybody could understand. So these are, some of her classical pieces. She also, realized that she had to make money. I mean, that's just one of the things. And you may remember that in the 19th century, there was kind of a fairy craze, at least in Britain. It must have had, so Harriet Hosmer created two fairy pieces, essentially. This one is Puck. Puck, Robin Goodfellow, is the mischievous fairy from Midsummer Night's Dream, and also from folklore. And she shows him here as a kind of puto. In other words, if you've seen Renaissance and Baroque art, where you see the little babies, little baby boys with wings, who are either Eros figures, little loves, or somehow they become little baby angels. We call them cherubs. In this case, he looks like her, but if you take a little closer look, you'll see he's not, because those wings are membranous wings, more like a bat wing than a feathered bird wing. So that indicates his mischievous, or somewhat, again, what Puck is morally ambiguous, I guess you would say, his mischievous nature. So here we have this very cute little plump puto sitting on a toadstool with the membranous wings. It was modeled in 1854, it was carved in 1856, and it was a complete commercial success. The Prince of Wales purchased it, and she had 30 reproductions made, which she sold at $1,000 each, $30,000. That was a big deal in the 19th century, and that ensured her economic independence. So this was just something that was, today we might say, oh, the subject is trivial. This would be a modern look down your nose at ideas from other periods. But one of the things that artists, and particularly the women artists who are making their own way, have to think about is commercial success, and this ensured her her economic independence. I should probably say something about the carving. One of the reasons all these sculptors, Gibson, Hosmer, everybody else, are in Rome is because the way the artist often worked is the sculptor would make a clay or plaster model, life-size, of the work of art that was to be created. And then they would take it to Rome, where there were these very, very skilled stone carvers who could make absolutely accurate reproductions. And that was their job. And they'd probably been, there's a tradition in Rome going clear back to the Romans, where they would make these reproductions of Greek statues. And that's what we know of most of the famous Greek statues. There is no Polyclitus's spear bearer, Doryphorus, that exists today. We know it only from Roman copies. Well, here we are in the 19th century, and the Romans still have a good business in making absolutely accurate reproductions. Now, the women artists availed themselves of these Roman stone carvers, and so did the male artists. But there were times when people would try to make an issue of it. But here, when you're doing a series of reproductions, of course, the artist would create the original, may or may not carve the original, but then the stone carvers would be commissioned to create the reproductions, and then she'd sell them. And that wasn't unusual. That wasn't just something that she did. That was something that the male artist did as well. This is sort of the companion piece to Puck, once again, the fairy craze. This is called the Will-o'-the-Wisp, Will-o'-wisp. And it's 1858. A very popular, even more economic success added to the Puck. And once again, it came out in copies. This, I think, is one of her most beautiful works, Beatrice Genji. The work is done in 1857. And as you can see, this beautiful figure of this ideal figure of the woman lying with a cushion and then a strong stone slab with the ring in it. And this is because she is a prisoner and she's about to be executed. And I'll tell you her story in a moment. But as you see how very, very graceful it is, the drapery clings to the body. Just, really an exquisitely beautiful piece. One of the interesting things when I saw this is I immediately thought of another work of art that is in Rome, made some centuries earlier, Santa Cecilia. This was made, as you can see, right at the end of the 16th century by Stefano Maderno. And it was made, Saint Cecilia, this is at the Church of Santa Cecilia, Saint Cecilia, in Rome, and her tomb was there. She was an early Christian martyr, and her tomb was opened in 1595, and it was a big sensation because the body was found absolutely incorrupt. In other words, the body had not rotted away, and this was seen as a particular sign of God, suspending natural law, natural events, the body's rot, to show that she was indeed a true saint. And of course, I don't suppose there's any doubt about it. When the tomb was opened, Stefano Maderna created a sculpture that was supposed to represent the body in the pose they found it. And of course, her head was chopped off, so the head was separate. And you'll see that line that sort of separates the body. And she's lying on her sides with her arms outstretched. And so this was supposed to be the pose that she was buried in. And so he created this work of art. And remember, Hosmer's been in Rome, so she probably has seen this. And you can see the graceful quality. She raises up the figure, so you have more different levels. And of course, she has the one arm hanging down. And you see the face. It's not turned away because her head is not yet cut off. But there's an interesting play between the figure who is waiting her execution, Beatrice, and the saint, who is preserved in the pose where she's been executed and buried. Beatrice Genji was actually the subject of some literary efforts as well. Who she was historically was I'm trying to think what the period was. I think it was 16th century, but anyway, 16th or 17th century. The father of the family was a horrible abuser. He abused the children. He raped his daughter, Beatrice, and finally the members of the family conspired to murder him, including, as you can see, Beatrice. And of course they were all condemned to death, even though it's this horrible story. You could have called it self-defense, and this is of course an issue that people are still debating today. Does an abused person have the right to kill the abuser, particularly when the law is on the abuser's side, which for a woman was pretty much throughout history. Men were actually told in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance that they should beat their wives. Husbands were supposed to had complete and absolute control over their children. They could beat them, they could marry them to whomever they pleased, and in the case of, well, actually, I guess they could also rape their sons too. In fact, some of the child laws were probably because of the abuse of the men. Finally, I know, in the 19th century, they started to have some laws against child abuse. But the father had absolute control. In England in the 19th century, for example, if a father was abusing his children and the wife wanted to take the children and take them away from him, she couldn't, because the law said that he had complete power, and if she did that, he could easily cut her off without food. She would just starve to death, and he still would retain control of the children. So it was like a no way out situation. And so this is one of the stories, which is not just a story, it was a historical case that probably made people think about these things. So here is a woman who is going to be executed for essentially defending herself, because she certainly didn't have the right to kill someone who was her father, even if he were trying to kill her or rape her. I also thought her Medusa was kind of interesting because it was so calm and collected, and the snakes could almost be curls. You have to look very, very closely to see that they are indeed snakes. One of her very, very famous pieces was Zenobia, the Queen of Palmyra. And I found this bust is actually in the Art Institute of Chicago. It is inscribed on the back, Harriet Hosmer, Fecit Roma. So she made this in Rome. And the date that they gave was slightly before the full-scale version. So I don't know if she must have carved this when she was in the process of creating her life-sized figure of Zenobia. So you see here they're suggesting that it's 1857. It's not dated. The very famous statue was finished in 1859, Zenobia in chains. And here we have the figure, which is life-size, and was very well received. Zenobia was supposed to have both womanly modesty and manly courage. And it's an intellectual topic because it refers to something from classical Rome. The Queen of Palmyra was captured by the Romans, and as the Romans would do, they would take their noble captives or anybody who might lend luster to their triumphal procession, and she was led through the streets of Rome in chains. And so the idea was that this is a person who has been laid low by Romans, by fate, but she is noble even in defeat. And she has a noble demeanor, pride, even though she has been defeated and is now enslaved, going from queen to slave. And this, of course, is at the time when slavery is a very debated topic in the United States. So you could make a kind of subtle comment here without being overt and antagonizing people on the other side of the debate. One of the interesting things about this is she did have photographs taken of it and sent to Anna Jameson. Now, Anna Jameson was a writer, and she actually was, today I guess we could call her an art historian, because she wrote many books on Christian iconography, on art of the Renaissance. I have two of them. I was able to find them in a used bookstore. I have The Legend of the Monastic Order and Sacred and Legendary Art. And when I was in school, we still read Anna Jameson sometimes. She's very, very good at Christian iconography. The problem with her books, she doesn't put footnotes and tell you the sources. But every once in a while I read a section from it, it's like, wow. She has the prejudices of her day. I mean, I was absolutely shocked to read The Jews Killed Christ, but this was a 19th century prejudice. The book that I don't have, that I'd love to have, is The Legends of the Virgin. So I suppose now with the internet, you'd have to pay big bucks for her pictures. She also did line drawings of these famous paintings, and they illustrate her book. And you can find those, sometimes I actually found them on the internet one time. A company was sort of selling them for use, and I remember looking at that and saying, hey, I could go over and scan it right out of my book myself. So Anna Jameson is a pretty interesting name for art historians, and as a woman it's quite unusual, particularly at this time. Not now, but it was then. So Zenobia in Chains was critical success. It made Harriet Hosmer, a very well-known and well-thought-of artist. And one of the comparisons that's often made between Zenobia is another female figure in chains, is a statue by Hiram Powers, another American sculptor, and it's called The Greek Slave from 1844. Now, as you see, there's a big difference. Hiram Powers' Greek slave is a nude female who looks very, very classical. She is chained at her wrists, but she's able to kind of move in a contrapposto. Her garment is forming the support. You always have to have some kind of support if you don't have if you have narrow little ankles at the bottom of your statue, you need to have some other support or it will break off in the marble statues. And the implication is that she has been forced to remove her clothing. The Greek slave could have a couple of meanings. Obviously, you think of ancient Greece, but also the War of Independence between Greece and Turkey, in which the Greek citizens were sometimes enslaved by the Turks. And so it has a kind of erotic and sexual implication to it that is not there in Harriet Hosmer's work. Zenobia, of course, is very, very different. She is chained. She will probably be executed as part of the triumphal games and festivities after a great military victory. But she is dignified. She's completely clothed. She has. She still has her honor, and there isn't the titillating factor that we see with Hiram Powers' Greek slave. But it is kind of interesting too. As I said, this is the time when they are debating slavery in the United States. So it could have a subtle little message there. She also was given a commission for a very huge statue. As you can see here, she's working on the model, and you can see the scale. I also should mention something. She has those stairs, she has a scaffolding, she has to climb up. And it's kind of inconvenient for women to have to work in skirts. As you can see, she's got a shorter garment here, so she doesn't trip and fall and kill herself when she's climbing up and down the stairs or the scaffolding to work on these life-size forms. And so that was, there's another artist we're going to talk about, Elizabeth Ney, and she scandalized people by wearing bloomers. And one person evidently did see her scaffolding and said, "Oh, now I understand why. She couldn't possibly wear skirts, and that." So that was one excuse, I guess, to wear. I don't know if Hosmer needed an excuse, but it certainly was much more practical. Okay, so here we see her working on the statue of Thomas Hart Benton, who is this is commissioned of Senator Thomas Hart Benton. So we see her working on this full-scale model of Senator Thomas Hart Benton. It's about 1860. And we've already talked about him. He's the subject of art by another woman artist, remember? Sarah Miriam Peale. And that's a painted portrait. Hosmer was a neoclassical artist. And for a while, neoclassicism was received in the United States. There are some times when neoclassicism was not received well in the United States, and one of the comments about this is it seems very odd that this Westerner should be dressed in the garments like a toga from ancient Rome, but that was to give them the gravitas and the presence that was expected in these works. We see here the actual monument still there. And when this was unveiled, it was a big holiday in St. Louis, and they canceled school, and everybody came out to see the statue. But as I say, it has been criticized because of its neoclassical costume. Like he would never have worn anything like that. But calm, dignified. He could be a Roman senator as well as one in the U.S. Senate.